Commander Thalren stood in the Grand Hall of the Eternal Vigilance, watching the newest members of the Galactic Coalition present their military credentials. His forearms were crossed in what his species considered a posture of patient judgment, though inside he felt only boredom. 40 years of combat service had taught him to recognize true warriors, and these newcomers were not impressive. The humans had arrived 3 months ago with a small fleet of ships that looked primitive compared to Korthon vessels. Their weapons were chemical-based projectiles and simple energy weapons. Their armor was barely adequate. Their tactics, from what intelligence reported, relied heavily on something they called adaptability, rather than proper military doctrine. Thalren had seen 1,000 species rise and fall in the galactic arena, and humans seemed destined to be footnotes in history. Captain Jiho Kim stepped forward to the presentation platform. He was a small creature by galactic standards, barely reaching Thalren's chest even with the commander's natural hunch. His skin was pale, his eyes dark, and his expression utterly calm, despite standing before the greatest military minds of 73 species. Behind him stood Lieutenant Mina Park, a female officer whose sharp eyes seemed to catalog everything in the room. "Honored members of the Coalition," Jiho began, his voice steady through the translation device. "Humanity thanks you for accepting us into your ranks. We understand we are new to galactic warfare. We understand our technology is behind yours. But we bring something valuable to this alliance." Thalren felt his scales ripple with amusement. What could they possibly bring? Hope? Enthusiasm? These things died quickly, in real combat. "We bring experience in survival," Jiho continued. "Our species has fought itself for thousands of years. We have learned to fight in every environment our world offers. Mountains, oceans, deserts, frozen wastelands. We have learned to fight when outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. We have learned that battles are not won by calculations alone, but by the will to continue fighting when calculation says you should surrender." Several species in the audience shifted uncomfortably. The Venn delegates, known for their mathematical approach to warfare, seemed particularly offended by this statement. Thalren himself felt his neck crest rise slightly. Will? What use was will against plasma cannons and orbital bombardment? Lieutenant Mina Park activated a display showing human military history. Battles flashed across the screen, primitive conflicts with names like Thermopylae, Stalingrad, Chosin Reservoir, small forces holding against massive ones, defeated armies regrouping and counterattacking, cities that refused to fall, even when surrounded and starving. "Our doctrine is simple," Jiho said. "We fight until we win, or until there is nothing left to fight with. We do not calculate acceptable losses. We do not establish retreat parameters before engagement. We establish our objective, and we take it, regardless of cost." The Drex ambassador, a towering insectoid creature with compound eyes, clicked his mandibles in what Thalren recognized as skepticism. "Captain Kim," the Drex said, "such tactics are admirable in primitive warfare, but modern combat requires precision. Fleets worth billions of credits cannot be risked on emotional concepts like fighting spirit." Jiho nodded slowly. "Ambassador, I understand your concern, but I would ask you to consider this. When your calculations tell you a battle cannot be won, what do you do? We retreat to preserve our forces for battles we can win." The Drex replied immediately. "And when the enemy knows this about you," Mina Park interjected, her voice cool and analytical, "they simply need to present you with scenarios your calculations cannot solve. You become predictable. We do not." Thalren felt a flicker of interest at this. The female officer had a point, though a small one. Still, unpredictability without overwhelming force was just chaos. Chaos led to defeat. The presentation continued for another hour. Humans discussed their training methods, their emphasis on small unit independence, their belief in empowering individual soldiers to make tactical decisions. It all sounded like a recipe for disaster to Thalrin. Armies needed structure, hierarchy, and clear chains of command. Letting common soldiers make decisions was how you got massacred. When the presentation ended, the Coalition command gathered to discuss human deployment. Marshal Vrex of the Ven spoke first. Their ships are adequate for patrol duty. I recommend assigning them to the outer marker zones, low-risk positions where their lack of experience will not endanger primary assets. General Korth, Thalrin's own superior, agreed. The humans have spirit. I will grant them that. But spirit without proven ability is just noise. Give them quiet sectors. Let them learn how real warfare operates. In a few centuries, perhaps they will be ready for serious combat. The decision was made quickly. Human forces would be deployed to reserve positions in the Coalition defensive network. They would patrol areas where nothing ever happened, respond to minor pirate incursions, and generally stay out of the way while real soldiers did real work. As the meeting dissolved, Thalrin found himself walking past Captain Jiho Kim in the corridor. The human looked up at him, and for a moment their eyes met. Thalrin expected to see disappointment or frustration at the dismissive treatment humanity had received. Instead, he saw only quiet observation, as if the human were studying him, memorizing details for some future purpose. "Commander Thalrin," Jiho said, nodding respectfully. "I look forward to fighting alongside your people." Thalrin returned the nod, more out of politeness than genuine sentiment. "As do I, Captain. May your patrols be peaceful." As he walked away, Thalrin allowed himself a small smile. The humans would learn soon enough that modern warfare was nothing like their primitive planetary conflicts. Space combat required discipline, technology, and proven tactics. Their talk of fighting spirit and improvisation would fade when they faced real threats. He did not know then how completely wrong he was. He did not know that within months, he would watch these same humans redefine everything he thought he understood about war. He did not know that the quiet captain with the observant eyes was already studying him, analyzing Korthan weaknesses and strengths, preparing for battles that would test every assumption the Coalition held about combat. Thalrin returned to his quarters that night, confident in his assessment. Perhaps in a few centuries, humanity would learn what real warfare meant. Perhaps they would grow beyond their emotional approach to combat and embrace proper military science. He would remember this thought later, and it would make him feel like the greatest fool in the galaxy. The alarms began screaming across Coalition space on a Tuesday morning. Though such planetary time measurements meant little in the void, Thalrin was reviewing supply manifests when his second officer burst into his command chamber, all four of her arms trembling with urgency. "Commander, the border stations are under attack. Multiple systems. It is the Skrell." Thalrin felt his blood run cold. The Skrell were a nightmare from the dark spaces between stars. An insectoid hive mind species that had been quiet for 50 years. When they moved in numbers that blotted out suns. Individual Skrell were weak, barely able to withstand small arms fire. But they came in waves of millions, accepting casualties that would break any sane military force. Within hours, Thalrin's 3rd Korthan battle group was deployed to the Kelvin system, one of 18 critical defensive positions along the border. His fleet consisted of 47 vessels, with attached ground forces numbering 70,000 soldiers. By Coalition doctrine, this was adequate force for a system defense operation. The first Skrell vessels appeared on his sensors like a plague. Hundreds of bioships, each one grown rather than built, each one carrying thousands of warriors. They moved with eerie coordination, the hive mind directing them in patterns no individual intelligence could match. "All ships, defensive formation Delta 7, Thalrin ordered. "Establish firing solutions. Prepare for sustained engagement. Thanks for watching. I'm Lou." The battle began exactly as his training predicted. Coalition ships formed overlapping fields of fire. Skrell bioships charged forward, accepting devastating losses to close the distance. When they got close, they released boarding pods and fighters in swarms that darkened space. Coalition point defense systems hammered them, destroying thousands, but more kept coming. "Commander, Kelvin 4 has fallen," his tactical officer reported on the second day. The garrison fought well, but the Skrell numbers were too great. Station command ordered evacuation when enemy forces reached the primary hull. Thalren nodded grimly. This was proper doctrine. When a position became untenable, you evacuated your forces to fight another day. Soldiers were valuable assets, trained and experienced. Losing them to hold a position that would fall anyway was wasteful. By the end of the first week, coalition forces had withdrawn from 3 systems. It was an orderly retreat, exactly as trained. Forces pulled back to secondary defensive lines, consolidated strength, and prepared for the next engagement. Military analysts calculated that at this rate, they could trade space for time, wearing down the Skrell advance, while building up forces for a counterattack. In approximately 14 months, Thalren studied the tactical maps in his ready room, noting the red markers showing abandoned systems. Among them was Station Kelvin 9, a medium-sized defensive platform that had been assigned to the human contingent. According to reports, the station was commanded by Captain Dongwu Che and Major Heijin Seo, with a garrison of approximately 3,000 human soldiers. "Status of Kelvin 9? He asked his intelligence officer. The officer consulted his datapad. "Commander, the human garrison received evacuation orders 48 hours ago. They did not comply. Last communication indicated they were preparing defensive positions. Command has classified them as combat losses." Thalren felt a pang of regret. The humans had seemed earnest, if naive. Now their stubbornness would cost them their lives. He had seen this before, with younger species. They did not understand that survival to fight another day was a viable strategy. They thought courage meant standing and dying. "Note their sacrifice in the record," Thalren said quietly. "They deserve that much." The second week brought more withdrawals. The Skrell seemed endless. For every bioship destroyed, 2 more appeared. Coalition casualty rates remained acceptable by military standards, but worlds were being abandoned. Populations evacuated ahead of the unstoppable swarm. Thalren's battle group was ordered to fall back through the Kelvin system to the secondary defensive line at Threshold Station. It was during this withdrawal that his communications officer looked up with confusion on his face. "Commander, I am detecting active military transmissions from Kelvin 9. Thalren moved to the communications station. "That is impossible. The station fell 6 days ago." "Sir, the transmissions are definitely originating from Kelvin 9. They are using human encryption protocols, but the signal is strong and clear." Against standing orders, Thalren ordered his sensor arrays to focus on the station. What he saw on the screens made no sense. Kelvin 9 was still there, still intact, and still fighting. Skrell bioships surrounded it like insects around a dying animal. But the station's weapons were firing. Its shields were active, and its communication arrays were broadcasting. "Get me a visual," Thalren ordered. The main screen shifted to show Kelvin 9 inches high resolution. The station bore scars of battle. Hull breaches glowed orange with emergency seals. Entire sections showed signs of explosive decompression. But the humans were still there, still fighting, and as Thalren watched, a coordinated missile barrage destroyed 3 approaching Skrell boarding craft. "How?" his tactical officer whispered. "By every calculation, that station should have fallen days ago." Thalren intercepted the human communication channels, listening to the chatter between defensive positions. What he heard shocked him more than the station's survival. "Section 7 is breached. Sealing bulkheads. Negative on the seal. The mechanism is fried. Heijin, you got anything?" "Working on it." "Teijin, I need 5 minutes and whatever the hell those bugs use for blood." "Copy that, Major." "You hear that, second squad? Go get the Major some bug juice." There was actually laughter on the channel. Laughter. These humans were surrounded by millions of Skrell. Their station was falling apart around them, and they were laughing. Thalren watched as a human squad, led by someone called Tajin, charged into a section filled with Skrell warriors. They moved differently than any soldiers he had seen before. No formation, no coordination, just violent improvisation. One soldier's weapon jammed, so he ripped a piece of bulkhead free and used it as a club. Another ran out of ammunition and threw his weapon like a spear before drawing a knife. They collected containers of Skrell bioacid and withdrew. Minutes later, Major Heijin Seo used that acid to jury-rig an explosive seal for the breached section. Station Kelvin 9 to all coalition forces. Captain Dongwu Che's voice came over the general channel. We are still operational. Still fighting. If anyone out there is listening, we will hold this position. Repeat. We will hold. Thalren's crew looked at him, waiting for orders. By regulation, he should ignore the transmission and continue his withdrawal. Kelvin 9 was lost. The humans just did not know it yet, but he could not look away. He diverted a surveillance probe to maintain visual contact with the station, recording everything. Command would be angry, but he had to see this. He had to understand how these humans were doing the impossible. Over the next 3 days, as his fleet withdrew to safety, Thalren watched the humans fight. They should have run out of ammunition. They made their own from Skrell equipment. They should have run out of food. They ate emergency rations meant for life pods. They should have collapsed from exhaustion. They slept in shifts, measured in minutes, never all resting at once. And slowly, impossibly, they stabilized their position. The Skrell could not overwhelm them because every section they took was trapped, mined, or rigged to explode. The humans gave ground only to ambush the Skrell from unexpected angles. They turned off life support in sections to freeze the Skrell, then vented those sections into space. They were not fighting by doctrine. They were making up new tactics every hour, learning from each Skrell assault, adapting faster than the hive mind could adjust. Thalren sat in his command chair, watching the recordings late into the night cycle. He had been wrong. They had all been wrong. These humans were not naive or foolish. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors who refused to accept that survival was impossible. As his ship jumped away to safety, Thalren looked back at Kelvin 9, still burning in the darkness, still fighting. A message appeared on his personal console from Captain Dongwu Che, sent on a tight beam just before they left sensor range. Thank you for watching, Commander. We will still be here when you come back. Thalren saved that message. Something told him he would need to remember it. Station Kelvin 9 should have been a tomb. By every military calculation, every proven tactical model, every strategic projection, it should have fallen 12 days ago. Instead, it was still broadcasting, still fighting, and still making the Skrell swarm pay for every meter of corridor. Thalren had defied direct orders to maintain surveillance of the station. His probe network gave him real-time access to external cameras and intercepted human communications. He told himself he was gathering intelligence on human combat effectiveness. The truth was simpler. He could not look away. The station was a wreck. Entire sections were open to vacuum. Hull plating hung in twisted sheets, where Skrell bioweapons had eaten through. Emergency lights flickered in sections that should have been dark and abandoned. But the humans were there, moving through their dying station like ghosts, appearing where the Skrell did not expect them, striking and vanishing before the hive mind could coordinate a response. Thalren watched Sergeant Taejin Han lead a squad through the ventilation system. The passages were narrow, barely wide enough for human bodies, far too small for proper military operations. But Taejin did not care about proper operations. He cared about results. Contact in Junction 7, the sergeant's voice crackled over the comm. Looks like about 200 bugs setting up a staging point. That's above your section, Taejin. Major Heijin Seo replied from her makeshift command center. You're in no position to engage. Actually, Major, we're in a perfect position. They're standing right under a coolant main, the kind that carries liquid nitrogen. There was a pause. Then, Thalren heard laughter. "Do it," Hagen said. Tajin's squad planted explosive charges on the coolant pipe and withdrew to a safe distance. The explosion was small, barely a blip on station sensors, but the result was devastating. Hundreds of liters of super-cooled liquid nitrogen poured into Junction 7, flash freezing everything below. 200 Skrell warriors became ice sculptures in seconds. Junction 7 cleared, Tajin reported calmly. Moving to our next position. This was how humans fought. Not with overwhelming firepower or superior technology, but with absolute creativity and a complete disregard for conventional tactics. They turned their dying station into a weapon, using every system, every resource, every environmental factor against their enemies. Thalren watched combat medic Sumin Kang work in what had once been the medical bay. She was treating wounded soldiers while simultaneously manning a defensive position. A Skrell probe creature skittered into the bay, and without interrupting the bandage she was applying, Sumin drew a pistol and shot it with her free hand. Then went back to her medical work, as if nothing had happened. "You are supposed to be a healer," Thalren muttered to himself, watching the screen. As if she could hear him, Sumin spoke to the wounded soldier she was treating. "I keep you alive so you can keep fighting. That is how I save lives. By making sure there are enough of us to win." The soldier grinned through his pain. "Doc, you are terrifying." "Good," Sumin replied, injecting something into his arm. The bugs should be terrified too, but it was Captain Dongwu Che who truly captured Thalren's attention. The human commander did not lead from a safe command center. He was everywhere, fighting alongside his soldiers, making decisions in real time based on constantly changing conditions. Thalren watched him move through the station and slowly understood something profound. Dongwu was not commanding a battle. He was conducting a symphony of controlled chaos. Every squad operated independently, but somehow they all worked together. When one position fell back, another was already prepared to ambush the pursuing Skrell. When supplies ran low in one section, another section somehow had extras. It was improvisation, raised to an art form. On the 14th day of the siege, Thalren watched something that changed his understanding of warfare forever. The Skrell had finally managed to mass enough forces to push toward the station's reactor core. If they took it, the station would die. Every sensor Thalren had told him this was the end. The humans simply did not have enough soldiers to defend the approach corridors. Captain Dongwu Che stood in the reactor control room with Major Heijin Seo and a dozen engineers. Thalren expected them to be preparing evacuation protocols or surrender communications. Instead, they were rigging explosives. "Are they going to deny the reactor to the enemy?" Thalren's tactical officer asked. "No," Thalren said slowly, understanding dawning on him. "They are building a trap." Heijin worked with frightening efficiency, connecting power conduits to explosive charges, rerouting reactor safeties, creating a system that would turn the entire reactor level into a kill zone. But the plan was insane. To make it work, someone had to stay behind to trigger it at exactly the right moment, and that person would not survive. "I will do it," Dongwu said simply. "Sir, you are the commander," one of his officers protested. "Exactly. Which means it is my job to give you time to win this fight. Heijin, you take command when I am gone. Hold this station." "Dongwu," Heijin said quietly, and Thalren was surprised to hear emotion in her voice. These humans had been fighting for 2 weeks without rest, and yet they still had the energy to care about each other. "We knew what we signed up for," Dongwu replied. "Now go. Let me do my job." The Skrell came in a massive wave, thousands of warriors flooding toward the reactor level. Dongwu waited, alone in the control room, watching sensors as the enemy filled the corridors. Thalren found himself leaning forward, hands gripping his command chair, unable to breathe. At the last possible second, Dongwu transmitted on the general channel. "For humanity. For the coalition. For everyone who said, we were not warriors. Watch this." He triggered the explosives. 3 entire levels of the station collapsed inward. The reactor went into emergency shutdown, plasma venting systems activated, and magnetic containment fields reversed polarity. The explosion was not nuclear, but it was devastating. Tens of thousands of Skrell warriors were crushed, burned, or blown into space in an instant, and impossibly, through a combination of luck and brilliant engineering, Captain Dongwu Che survived. Heijin had secretly rigged an emergency teleporter in the control room, gambling that she could pull him out in the microseconds between activation and detonation. Status. Heijin's voice cracked over the comm. Still here, Dongwu coughed. How did the trap work? Perfectly, sir. We estimate 90% casualties among the assault force. The Skrell are withdrawing. Thalren stood up from his command chair, all four of his arms trembling. His crew stared at him, wondering what could shake their commander so completely. Send a message to Coalition Command, Thalren said, his voice hoarse. Mark Station Kelvin 9 as combat operational. Garrison status. Effective. Recommend full strategic reassessment of human combat capabilities. His communications officer hesitated. Sir, Command ordered us not to communicate about the station. They have written it off as lost. Then Command is wrong, Thalren said sharply. I have spent 40 years in service. I have fought in 12 major campaigns. I thought I understood warfare. I thought I knew what combat looked like. I was wrong. Those humans are showing us something we have forgotten, or perhaps never knew. They are not fighting because they think they can win. They are fighting because they refuse to lose. There is a difference, and it changes everything. He sat back down, eyes locked on the screen showing Station Kelvin 9. Battered and burning but still intact. Still broadcasting. Still fighting. Record all of this, he ordered. Every second. Command needs to see what I have seen. The Coalition needs to understand what humanity brings to this war. Not technology. Not numbers. But something far more dangerous. What is that, Commander? His second officer asked. Thalren watched Sergeant Taejin Han lead another raid through the ventilation systems. Watched Medic Sumin Kang treat the wounded while manning her gun. Watched Captain Dongwu Che limp back to command, while already planning the next defense. Hope, Thalren said quietly. They bring hope, and the absolute refusal to surrender no matter what the odds say. The impossible defense of Kelvin 9 bought the Coalition 3 weeks. 3 weeks to reinforce defensive lines. 3 weeks to study the battle recordings. 3 weeks for Coalition Command to realize they had completely misunderstood humanity's military capabilities. Thalren sat in a strategy meeting where the most brilliant military minds in the Coalition tried to analyze human tactics. General Korth pulled up footage of Sergeant Taejin Han's ventilation raids. This should not work, the general said, frustration clear in his voice. They are operating in areas too confined for proper equipment. They are attacking forces that outnumber them 30 to 1. They are using improvised weapons made from enemy corpses. By every tactical model, they should be dead. But they are not dead, Marshal Vrex pointed out. And their success rate is extraordinary. I have analyzed their combat patterns. They do not follow any established doctrine. Each engagement is completely unique. That is the problem, Korth replied. How do we replicate tactics that are never the same twice? Thalren spoke up. Perhaps we are asking the wrong question. We are trying to copy their tactics when we should be learning their philosophy. They do not fight by doctrine because they believe doctrine limits options. They train their soldiers to think, not just obey. The room fell silent. This was heresy to military professionals who had spent lifetimes perfecting command structures and tactical procedures. That is chaos, someone objected. No, Thalren said firmly. It is controlled chaos. The difference is trust. Human commanders trust their soldiers to make good decisions. In return, those soldiers fight with initiative that no rigid doctrine could ever match. Coalition Command reluctantly approved a joint operation program. Selected coalition units would be embedded with human forces to observe and learn. Thalren volunteered immediately, claiming he wanted to better understand the enemy's methods for countering human tactics. The truth was simpler. He needed to know if what he saw at Kelvin 9 was luck or something reproducible. He was assigned to a strike unit led by Lieutenant Jiwon Baek and Staff Sergeant Yoonho Nam. They were tasked with raiding a Skrell supply depot behind enemy lines. It was exactly the kind of mission that Doctrine said required overwhelming force and detailed planning. The humans planned for 4 hours and went in with 12 soldiers. 12? Thalren had said when he saw the roster. The depot will have thousands of Skrell defenders. 13 if you are coming with us, Commander, Jiwon replied with a slight smile. We find that smaller groups are harder to detect and can move faster when things go wrong. When things go wrong? Thalren repeated. Should you not plan to prevent things from going wrong? Yoonho laughed at that. Commander, things always go wrong. The question is not if, but when, and how badly. We plan for success, but expect problems. That way, we are ready for anything. The mission was Thalren's introduction to human warfare up close. They infiltrated the depot using a captured Skrell bioship, which Yoonho had somehow learned to pilot despite it being a living creature grown by the enemy. When they were discovered halfway to their objective, Jiwon did not call for retreat or reinforcement. She simply said, Plan F. And the squad shifted to a completely different approach without hesitation. How many plans do you have? Thalren asked as they fought through a corridor. Alphabet's got 26 letters, Yoonho replied, shooting a Skrell warrior while running backward. We usually get to plan D or E before something works. They reached the depot's control nexus and planted charges. But, as they were withdrawing, a Skrell warrior hit Yoonho's rifle with its claw, shattering the weapon. Without pause, Yoonho grabbed the creature's severed claw from the ground and used it as a blade, cutting down 2 more Skrell before the squad cleared the area. Did you just use an enemy body part as a weapon? Thalren asked, shocked. Works, doesn't it? Yoonho said, examining the claw. Might keep this. Could be useful. On the way back to their extraction point, their transport ship was destroyed by Skrell fighters. Jiwon studied the terrain for exactly 30 seconds before pointing at a Skrell outpost 5 kilometers away. We are taking that, she announced. Lieutenant, that is an enemy position. Thalren said carefully, wondering if the human had finally lost her mind. Exactly, which means it has a ship. We need a ship. They have a ship. Simple math, Commander. The raid on the outpost was pure insanity. 12 humans and 1 Korthon attacked a fortified position defended by 200 Skrell. They used the confusion from the earlier depot explosion to their advantage, the darkness of the alien night, and their own complete willingness to do things no sane military force would attempt. Private Minsok Jang scaled the outpost wall, using magnetic boots and a grappling line, then opened the front gate from inside. Yoonho led a direct frontal assault that should have been suicide, but somehow worked because the Skrell had not expected anyone to be that aggressive. Jiwon coordinated it all with calm commands, adapting constantly as the situation changed, and then Thalren was hit. A Skrell plasma burst caught him in the side, burning through his armor. He went down hard, his vision blurring. Through the pain, he saw Private Minsok Jang running toward him. The young human was already wounded, blood streaking down his face. But he threw himself over Thalren's body, using his own form as a shield. Not today, Bugs, Minsok shouted, firing his weapon one-handed while covering the commander with his body. This one's ours. Impressus. More rounds hit Minsok. The human grunted with pain but did not move, did not stop fighting. Yoonho and 2 others reached them, providing covering fire, while Jiwon organized their withdrawal to the captured ship. Thalren tried to push Minsok off him. Private, you are wounded. Save yourself. Can't do that, sir, Minsok replied through gritted teeth. Got to show you alien friends we are not soft. Besides, you are going to help me walk when we get out of here. Fair trade. They made it to the ship. Thalren carried Minseok the last 3 kilometers, refusing to let the human who had saved his life be left behind. By the time they reached friendly lines, Minseok was barely conscious, having lost too much blood. Why? Thalren asked. The medics worked on the young private. Why did you shield me? I am not your species, not your squad. By any logical measure, you should have saved yourself. Minseok managed a weak grin. Commander, once you fight with us, you are one of us. Logic is got nothing to do with it. You are our brother now. That is just how it works. That night, after Minseok was stabilized and sleeping in the medical bay, the squad gathered around a makeshift fire in their temporary camp. They shared food, told stories about the mission, laughed about mistakes and near misses. They invited Thalren to join them, treating him not as an observer, but as part of their unit. I must ask you something, Thalren said to Jiwan as they sat together. How do you fight like this? Without certainty of victory? Without calculating odds? How do you continue when every logical analysis says you should retreat? Jiwan was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but firm. Commander, we never have certainty. Humans have fought each other for thousands of years. We have fought nature, disease, starvation, and extinction. We learned a long time ago that waiting for certainty means waiting forever. So we just decide that losing is not an option. And then we make reality agree with us. That is impossible, Thalren said. Is it? Jiwan smiled. You watched us hold Kelvin 9 for 3 weeks, when it should have fallen in 3 days. You just completed a mission that pulled off 6 impossible things before breakfast. At what point do you stop calling it impossible and start calling it human? Yunho joined them, still carrying the Skrell claw he had taken as a weapon. Commander, can I tell you what the difference is between us and most species? You all fight until it is not practical to keep fighting. We fight until we physically cannot fight anymore. You calculate acceptable losses. We get angry about every single loss and fight harder to avenge them. You see warfare as mathematics. We see it as personal. Thalren looked around at the squad. Every one of them was wounded. Every one of them was exhausted. Every one of them would be back in combat tomorrow, without hesitation. Your military philosophy is going to change the coalition, Thalren said quietly. Good, Jiwan replied. Because this war is not going to be won by the old methods. The Skrell are too many, too coordinated, too relentless. To beat them, everyone needs to learn what we know. That sometimes the only way forward is to refuse to accept that forward is impossible. Thalren requested to remain embedded with human units. Command reluctantly agreed, not understanding that their most experienced combat commander was not gathering intelligence on humanity. He was becoming one of them, learning to think like them, learning to fight like them, learning that everything he thought he knew about warfare was incomplete. The Battle of Threshold Gate would decide the war. Every military analyst in the coalition knew it. If the Skrell took Threshold, they would have direct access to the core worlds, to trillions of civilians, to the heart of coalition power. The defensive fleet assembled there represented the largest military force ever gathered in galactic history. It was not enough. The Skrell came with numbers that defied comprehension. 8 capital hive ships, each one the size of a moon. Thousands of support vessels. Millions of fighters and boarding craft. The swarm blotted out the stars. Coalition command gathered in the war room of the flagship Eternal Vigilance. Marshal Vrex displayed the tactical analysis on holographic screens. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. Conventional engagement will result in 47% casualties within the first 3 days, Vrex stated. By day 7, we will have lost 70% of our forces. Recommendation: staged withdrawal. We cede Threshold, but preserve the fleet for defense of the inner systems. The room filled with arguments. Some agreed with the marshal, others wanted to fight despite the odds. But everyone understood what withdrawal meant. Millions of civilians at Threshold Station would be left to the Skrell. Entire worlds in the outer systems would be abandoned. Admiral Kyung-ho Park stood up. The human officer was older than most, gray showing in his hair, scars marking his face from battles fought on Earth before humanity ever reached the stars. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience. "I have heard many plans today for how we lose," Kyung-ho said. "I have not heard a single plan for how we win." "Admiral Park, the numbers make victory impossible," General Korth replied. "The numbers made Kelvin 9 impossible," Kyung-ho countered. 3,000 humans held a station against forces that should have crushed them in hours. They held for 3 weeks. Why? Because they rejected the mathematics of defeat. "This is not a station, Admiral. This is the entire war," Vrex said. "Then let us fight like the entire war depends on it," Kyung-ho replied. "Because it does. I propose an alternative strategy. Not staged withdrawal. All-out offensive." The room erupted. Coalition officers shouted over each other, calling the plan madness, suicide, impossible. Through it all, Thalren sat quietly, remembering Lieutenant Jiwon Baek's words. "We decide that losing is not an option, and then we make reality agree with us." He stood up, and his rank demanded attention. The room fell silent. "I support Admiral Park's plan," Thalren said clearly. "For 40 years, I have fought by doctrine. I have calculated odds, assessed force ratios, and made logical military decisions. I have also watched humanity rewrite the rules of warfare in 3 months. I believe they know something we have forgotten. Sometimes, the only way to win is to refuse to accept that victory is impossible." The debate raged for hours. But slowly, impossibly, the humans convinced the coalition command, not through logic or calculation, but through force of will and the undeniable evidence of human victories against impossible odds. The plan was insane. Small human strike teams would infiltrate the Skrell hive ships, using captured bio-vessels, cause maximum chaos, disrupt the hive mind coordination. While the Skrell were distracted, the main coalition fleet would attack not defensively, but with overwhelming aggression, targeting the hive mind nexus points. Thalren volunteered to lead a mixed unit of Korthan soldiers and human commandos. His second officer stared at him in shock. "Commander, you are abandoning Korthan tactical doctrine." "No," Thalren replied. "I am expanding it. Doctrine is meant to help us win. When it prevents victory, doctrine must change. I have learned this from the humans. Now I will teach it to my people." The battle began at dawn, though in space such terms were meaningless. It was simply the moment when two massive forces collided, and the fate of civilizations hung in the balance. Colonel Daeho Song led a fighter squadron in what every pilot knew was a one-way mission. Their target was the command hive ship's sensor array. To reach it, they had to fly through a wall of defensive fire that coalition computers calculated would destroy 98% of them before they got close. "All fighters, this is Song," the colonel's voice came over the channel. "I am not going to lie to you. This is going to hurt. But our families are behind us, our friends are counting on us, and those bugs are about to learn what human pilots can do when we stop caring about surviving and start caring about winning. Follow me in. 3. 2B. They went in singing. Thalren, monitoring the battle from his assault craft, heard them singing a human battle song as they flew into hell. 96% of them died. But the remaining 4%, including Colonel Daeho Song, destroyed the sensor array. The hive ship was blind. Captain Eunji Kwon and Master Sergeant Junho Lee led commando teams into 3 different hive ships. Thalren watched their progress through helmet cameras. The interior of a hive ship was a nightmare of organic corridors, living walls, and millions of Skrell warriors. The humans moved through it like predators. Yunji's team fought their way to a nexus node, a massive organic structure that coordinated thousands of Skrell. They planted charges made from captured Skrell bioweapons, creating explosives that the hive mind did not recognize as threats until too late. Package delivered, Yunji reported calmly, as if she were delivering mail instead of walking through an alien hell. Initiating timer. We have 3 minutes to extraction. They did not make it out. None of Yunji's team did. But the Nexus node exploded, and suddenly 30,000 Skrell warriors lost coordination, becoming confused individuals instead of a unified force. For Yunji, Junho's voice came over the channel from another hive ship. For everyone we have lost. For everyone we are going to save. Make it count. 4, 4, 7. Thalren's assault team hit the third hive ship. His mixed unit of Korthon and human soldiers fought together, each learning from the other. The Korths provided strength and durability. The humans provided creativity and adaptability. Together, they were far more effective than either species alone. They held a critical junction for 6 hours against waves of Skrell. When ammunition ran low, they used Skrell weapons. When weapons failed, they used environmental hazards. When all else failed, they used their bodies as shields for their brothers. Private Minseok Jang fought beside Thalren, the young human having recovered from his earlier wounds. At one point, when a Skrell warrior was about to strike Thalren from behind, Minseok threw himself in the way, taking the blow meant for the commander. We are even now. Minseok grinned through the pain. We will never be even, Thalren replied, returning fire. In the main battle, Admiral Kyung-ho Park commanded the coalition fleet with a style that horrified traditional commanders and inspired everyone else. He moved his ships aggressively, taking risks that made strategic computers scream warnings. But every risk paid off because the humans had studied the Skrell for months, learning their patterns, anticipating their responses. At the critical moment, when the battle hung in the balance and the Skrell were beginning to coordinate a devastating counterattack, Kyung-ho gave an order that no one expected. All human vessels, prepare for ramming speed on my mark. The coalition channels erupted with protests. Kyung-ho ignored them. On my mark. Mark. Every human ship in the fleet turned toward the nearest Skrell capital vessel and accelerated to maximum speed. The Skrell, seeing suicide runs incoming, diverted all their forces to intercept. Every gun, every fighter, every defensive system focused on stopping the human ships. And then, 1 second before impact, every human ship simultaneously vented their reactor cores in a coordinated electromagnetic pulse. The blast was carefully calibrated, not strong enough to damage their own hardened systems, but devastating to Skrell biotechnology. For 30 seconds, the Skrell fleet was blind, deaf, and paralyzed. All coalition forces, Kyung-ho's voice rang out. Fire everything. The barrage was apocalyptic. Every weapon, every missile, every energy beam in the coalition arsenal fired into the helpless Skrell fleet. The 8 capital hive ships shuddered under the assault. Explosions rippled across their living hulls. Secondary detonations spread through their formations. And then, impossibly, the Skrell fleet began to retreat. The hive mind, for the first time in recorded history, chose survival over conquest. The swarm withdrew, leaving behind millions of casualties and the wreckage of their invasion force. The coalition had won. Thalren stood on the bridge of his battered ship, watching the Skrell flee. Around him, his mixed crew of Korthon and human soldiers embraced, cried, and celebrated. Species that had barely known each other months ago now fought and bled together as brothers. He received a communication from Admiral Kyung-ho Park. Commander Thalren, your unit performed exceptionally. Thank you. Admiral, I did nothing except what the humans have been trying to teach us all along, Thalren replied. To fight with heart as well as mind. To refuse defeat. To make the impossible possible through sheer force of will. Hours later, As the fleet began recovery operations, Thalren watched human ships rescuing Skrell survivors from destroyed vessels. It made no sense. These creatures had tried to annihilate them. Why show mercy? Colonel Mina Park, promoted after her successes at Kelvin 9, explained it to him. We fight viciously, so we can afford to be merciful in victory. We fight to survive, but we win to build something better. That is the difference between defeating an enemy and defeating the need for enemies. Thalren recorded a message to Korthan High Command that night. He knew it would change everything about how his people understood warfare. I was wrong. We all were. Humanity does not fight like us because they have mastered something we have not. They have made war personal. Every battle is for survival. Every soldier is family. Every victory is earned with blood and will. I thought I knew battle. I knew nothing. I have witnessed humanity unleashed. And I finally understand what terror feels like, and what hope looks like. They do not fight because they think they can win. They fight because they refuse to lose. There is a difference, and it changes everything. We must learn from them, or we will never truly understand what it means to be warriors. 1 week later, Thalren met with the original human delegation, Captain Jiho Kim and Lieutenant Mina Park, the two officers he had dismissed so completely months before. They met in a quiet observation deck, looking out at the stars humanity had helped save. I owe you an apology, Thalren said formally. I dismissed your capabilities. I called your tactics primitive. I thought you had nothing to teach us. I was wrong on every count. Jiho smiled, the same calm smile he had worn that first day. Commander, you learned. That is all we ever ask. Some species never do. You watched, you questioned, and you changed. That takes courage. Welcome to the real fight, Mina added. We are glad to have you. The real fight, Thalren repeated. Yes, I understand now. Every battle I fought before, I was fighting by doctrine. Now I fight for something more. For the people beside me. For the future we are building. For the choice to never surrender. No matter what the numbers say. He thought of Minseok Jang, who had shielded him twice. Of Lieutenant Jiwon Baek and her squad. Of the defenders of Kelvin 9. Of every human who had shown him that warfare was not just calculation, but will. Months later, Thalren stood before a class of Korthan military cadets, beginning their first lesson in tactics. He looked at their young faces, so confident in their training, so certain in their doctrine. Forget everything you think you know about warfare, he began. Or rather, remember it, but understand it is incomplete. I am going to teach you what I learned from humanity. How to fight when the odds say you cannot win. How to adapt when doctrine fails. How to make the impossible possible through nothing more than refusing to accept defeat. This will be hard. It will challenge everything you believe. But if you learn these lessons, you will become the warriors this galaxy truly needs. He pulled up the recordings from Kelvin 9. From Threshold Gate. From 100 human battles that defied logic and achieved victory anyway. Watch, he told them. Watch and learn. This is what it means when humanity is unleashed. This is what we must become. And in the stars above, human ships patrolled alongside Korthan vessels, two species that had learned to fight as one, teaching the galaxy that sometimes the greatest weapon is not technology or numbers, but the simple refusal to give up, no matter what. The war continued, but the coalition had learned something precious from humanity. They had learned to hope.